finished working with took a break from working with the LA County Department of Mental Health as a clinical psychologist too in their specialized foster care department. In their specialized foster care department. Pastor Parks and I had the opportunity to be the second cohort in the webinar series with looking at the African American community and how it relates to churches and bridging the gap between mental health. So we counted an honor and a privilege to stand before you to try to expound on that and to share what we have experienced as both clinicians in this field and being very active members of our congregations and how to utilize the two to help contribute to our mental wellness.
All right, so with that, let me kind of set just kind of the frame for what we're talking about in terms of our learning objectives. Let me ask this question. How many of you have ever been to a predominantly African-American church, to like a service? Okay, then you all will understand this next thing that I'm about to say. At some point, I'll probably say, and I'm closing, and when I say that, that actually means that I'm gonna close like 5 other times. So just be prepared now. There's juice in the back. Get you some water. Just know that is coming. So I like to laugh every now and again, because as serious as we are, there's something that happens when we laugh. So there's something that it does for us. So I just want to look at some of the objectives, and this is in no ways exhaustive. And what myself and what Dr. Clark are presenting to you is a particular section of the African American, African descent population. So we'll be speaking more so from, in terms of Christian spirituality and our work within the African American population. There is room for all of us at the table. It's not like 2 cheers and that's it, and then everybody else stand outside and figure it out. There's room for all of us, and we want to respect everyone's tradition and belief and faith, and this is just something that we bring. So really for us, kind of the main point that we want to look at are what are some of the ways of integrating Christian thought, Christian spirituality, Christian practices into therapy, into mental health. Where can we intersect? Where can we come together and really kind of bridge the gap? And we want to actually make this a little bit more interactive towards the end. So we will have kind of a time for you guys to break out into sessions. So we'll kind of speed through the presentation, which you can actually find the entire presentation online at the CIMH website. And I believe I heard Ms. Crowder actually mention this when she was speaking in terms of the spiritual community being first responders. We are first responders, we only bring one particular aspect in terms of the Christian faith, but you have Muslim, you have Buddhist, you have indigenous practices. So we are the people that our people come to when they're hurt, when life happens, and things go wrong and things fall apart and they're hurt and they don't know necessarily what to do next, what is the next step. All they know is they're hurt, they're wounded, and I need someone who can be there. We are those people who are there. So we respond in a number of ways and to a number of issues: homelessness, food distribution, child development support groups. These are some of the assets that we bring as a culture in terms of the Christian faith. I'll speak to this more so as a culture, and one of the words that you'll kind of hear throughout this presentation is language. Language is, I felt like a church moment. I was about to say, everybody say language, and then I was gonna have you repeat. I was having a moment. But we have language. Language is very important. And so the church, kind of globally, not just one particular church, but the church overall has a language. And you will find within that language that there are nuances, much like I'll use something like Spanish. For those of you who speak Spanish, you can say one word in Spanish to one particular group, and they'll kind of look at you like, what are you talking about? I don't get. So we have those same nuances within the church as well. And we are essential to mental wellness, to recovery, to thriving. We are essential, an essential piece of that process that cannot be left out. And the church say, hey, there we go. By the end of this day, everybody will be like, amen, and then we'll take an offering. Explain.
When you came in, there were a few handouts that you all will need throughout the presentation. And one of those handouts has to do with language and translations of the languages. So if you did not get the handouts, I believe they are on that round table right back there. This next slide that you're looking...
They'll be passed out so we don't have everybody...
Are you going to help pass them out? Sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Okay, great. So when we're looking at faith assets, we're looking again at the language of health advocacy. And just this, we're going to go back to the language because it's going to become a pivotal part later on. But we just wanted to kind of give you an idea of some of the things and the language that we're talking about that's so important in the church, which contributes to why the Church for African Americans is viewed as first responders, because there's a language in the church of hope and of encouragement and of just being uplifted. So we might walk into a counseling session, or we might walk into the office and we might say that, we're feeling down or we're having issues or problems. And so when we walk into the office, they may say, oh, you're feeling, depressed or something. Well, that in the church might be called, you're going through a trial and a tribulation. So, and then that's something that as African Americans, we can connect with that. And so sometimes the language of the church takes some of the negative and more severe connotations that it has when we sit across from somebody, and it makes it more useful for us. So these are just some examples. Like, we use language like we've been redeemed, deliverance, we're overcomers, we're transformers. So that's just kind of what this slide is trying to show us.
So we do want to have a bit of kind of context to some of the role that we play. And I'm just talking about slavery and historical oppression, and this is, again, by no means exhaustive. But these things are very real and at play, and we live with them every day. Every day, these things are with us. And so I've broken this out into things like generational trauma that's passed down from generation to generation. Disrupted family systems, and the fact that in many homes, and I think this is true in many cultures as well, it's not specific to African Americans, but the fact that there are so many homes where there's only a mother, if that, or a grandmother, and we've seen a total disruption in terms of not having fathers and having that male figure. And I heard earlier today from the wisdom keepers just about that complementariness that we have to have. So when we only have one of something, then that means we're lacking something else. There's the self-hatred and internalized oppression. And again, I think I heard it. So I think they did most of our presentation already. So they, some of this would be like, oh, I heard that. But the self-hatred and internalized depression, we don't need, and please excuse me, I use like random phrases. We don't necessarily need white folk or a master to come in and oppress us. We can do it ourselves. And we do a pretty good job of it as well. Right? So it's no longer just this battle of, just forces on the outside. It's what we're dealing with on the inside. And then we have mistrust of systems. And if any of you have ever worked with anybody in foster care or any system, you know the challenges of, here comes my social worker, here comes my PO, here comes that therapist, and I don't want to call them a therapist, but they told me I need a therapist because something's wrong with me, right? So we understand these things that are at play, and they're working within our community. Just briefly, generational trauma. And, I forgot who it was that said it in terms of healing trauma, you have to stop the trauma. But we have ongoing trauma all the time. So it's not just someone who was lynched back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. We're seeing it every day, and it's broadcast on TV, and we see it right in front of us every day. And even for some people, this is kind of removed in terms of, Trayvon Martin. You don't have to go to Florida. All you need to do is hop on the 110, get off on Slauson. You ain't even got to go that far, truthfully, right? And it's the folks who look just like me that are causing this genocide, if I can put it this way. You know, it's happening right in our community. People that look exactly like each other that are killing one another. And so we're seeing this trauma, and it's perpetuated and it's played out every day in our streets. It's played out every day in our schools, right? I mean, it was horrible what happened at UC Santa Barbara. But we're having those traumas happening every day in our elementary schools, our middle schools, our high schools. So these things are happening. They're not isolated incidents. We live with these things every day. So with that, it brings about some reasons why there's a lack of utilization of services.
Thank you, Pastor Parks. So when we look at why is the church seen as first responders, it goes back to why there's a lack of utilization, which they kind of talked about during the Wisdom Keepers session. So the lack of utilization comes from the lack of congruence between racial and ethnic makeup of the providers. Most often when we walk into a mental health facility, we don't see us. Lack of access, poverty, transportation. We don't have these types of services readily available in our communities. And then when they do, they're not adequate services. Feelings that these things are normal. We've been taught as a culture that sometimes the feelings that we have are normal, and we're taught to internalize those things. Misdiagnosis and inappropriate treatment. Again, they alluded to the misdiagnosis also with the Wisdom Keepers. Seen as sign of weakness. In the African American culture, because there's been so much oppression and slavery, when we cannot deal with our situations, then that can be viewed as a sign of weakness. And so as to not be seen as that way by the community and society, we'll keep it in and just say, okay, that's all right, we'll just handle it on ourselves, we don't need to tell anyone else. And then it's a taboo within the culture. And it becomes a taboo because the culture doesn't fully understand the differences between psychotherapy or your clinical therapy, counseling, your pastoral counseling, your coaching, and what each of those means. And so mental health is always looked at in its severest form and not looking on it as the spectrum that does exist. So a little bit more about the stigma. Within our own culture, we have stigmatized mental health. It's associated in the African American community. It's linked to the community and its biggest support system. Although the church is seen as our biggest support system, in some ways the church is also has stigmatized mental health. So when you look at stigma, we look at stigma as being defined as, let me go back real quick. Stigma as being defined as a visible mark of shame, disgrace, disapproval, being shunned or rejected by others, which further debilitates and desensitizes the African American culture from utilizing our systems. So the stigma associated, again, is linked to our community. So to the next slide. Again, we have these things that when you watch the cartoons and sometimes they have those little question marks going off in their head, these are some of the things that are going through our minds as African Americans when we start to face situations. This is normal, we're gonna be weak, it's culturally unacceptable, it's not incurable, we'll keep it hidden, and then you have the big one, oh, that's what the church is for. So you don't need to go outside, let's just kind of keep that kind of like within the family. From within the church, the African American community is deeply rooted in its spiritual and religious values and morals. Now, depending on what we have in the African American church, and there's denominations everywhere. There are tons of denominations within the African American community. So some of the stigma from the church comes from which denomination that you serve in. Whether you come from what they call the Church of God in Christ, whether you come from a traditional Baptist background, whether you come from a Methodist background, whether you come from what's another one? The full gospel background. So each of these denominations carries their own set of rules, their own set of values, their own set of principles, their own sets of bylaws. And so whichever denomination you have been brought up in or conditioned in helps to shape how you perceive certain events and things that happen in life, and it contributes to the certain perceptions of mental illness that happen within the church that causes some stigma. So you have some denominations that just don't believe in the mental health system at all. There are no mental illnesses. That person just has demons. So now we need to cast out the demons, and we need to pray over, bless you with some holy oil, and then all is well. Or a lot of times they'll say, just pray about it. Let's take our burdens to the Lord and leave them there. You'll find within the African American community and in coping strategies, which we'll talk about in just a few moments, I'm going to change the slide, that there are a lot of things that we do as positive to keep ourselves going. So just the women in general, we're going to talk about coping as it relates to the male gender and as it relates to females. Someone talked about, I think again with one of the wisdom leaders, that women are essential. I think it was Jerry saying that in their culture that women are essential and women are really the glue that binds families together. Same thing in the African American culture. Yes, the men play a pivotal role as far as providing and things like that for the family, but women are seen as being very strong and carrying a lot of the weight. So when we as females in African American culture feel like there's something keeping us from being that thing, then we start to look at other ways where we can kind of maintain that. So the way that some women cope in the African American community, we distract ourselves from that thing that's going on, and we involve ourselves in other activities. Women tend to gravitate to more emotional-based things because we are very interpersonal people and we are very relationship-oriented. So we're going to engage ourselves in those type of activities that distract us from our own personal things because we have a giving nature, and so we always want to be of service to others. And so those are the type of activities that we will engage ourselves in when it comes to coping. So we might cook, we might shop, we may, what else do we do as women?
I don't know.
We may, we cook, we shop, we get involved in service groups in the church. Most of your ministries in the church are service ministries. So they get involved in the choir because then they can express themselves through song. They're on the usher board because they're greeting, they're welcoming those into the house. They're on the mother's board where again, they're taking care. They're on the missionary board. They're the pastor's aide. They're now assisting, taking care of the pastor. Other things that women get involved in, they meditate. Use a lot of positive affirmations, most of them biblically based. We like to refer to scripture. One in Philippians says that I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. Another one in Psalm says the joy of the Lord is my strength. Another one, I believe it's in John, that says, if God before me, who can be against me? So we feed ourselves these positive messages. We also use I am statements. I am more than a conqueror. I am a child of God. I am the head. I'm not the tail. I am a lender. I am not a borrower. So we try to feed ourselves with positive messages so that we can distract ourselves from the negatives that society try to impose on us. We do social networking, get involved in book clubs, relaxation techniques, which we don't do enough of because we're so caught up in that thing that has us stressed to where we really can't relax. And so we keep ourselves from being able to do that part. I'm honored and privileged to say that I had the opportunity to participate in piloting the first edition of a stress and coping interactive workbook in collaboration with the undergrad psychology students at Pepperdine University this past fall. And so in this workbook, we have looked at historically, what are some of the things that lead to the stressors that we experience as African American women? And there's opportunity to journal in there and to then identify what some of your stresses are, because what might be a stressor to me may not be a stressor to you. And then the last component of the workbook is equipped with strategies that help to kind of deal with some of the stresses that we encounter on a daily basis.
So I'll speak to the part that I understand being a man. I didn't get the lady part, although I do understand the shopping because I am married, so I get that one. Please, no one tell my wife that. All right. Working with African American males, we like to be active. We want to be doing something. It helps build a competence, a sense of trust, a sense that, you know what, I have something to offer. So we're very diverse. And then there are some things that people don't think about or maybe only look at in terms of the negative. So like the theory of the angry black man, right? So every black man you see, he angry about something. Well, you know, to some degree, there may be some truth to that, but just even if you just kind of look at the face there, I mean, our body language says something. I can tell you and give you a message without saying a word. All you have to do is be in tune and just, you know, pick up and look at my face, look at my body language. So I'm saying something. Something is being communicated. And this is our role as helpers, as professionals, which is what are you telling me? How can I connect with you? And then how can I bring about maybe some level of change or healing? How can we work together and come together and collaborate? Not just you're angry, go to 10 weeks of anger management, and then you'll be all good. That conversation has to be a lot deeper than that. We're really good at creating culture. So hip hop, it's a culture that was created in the inner city. Now, I mean, it's been commercialized, so I ain't even dealing with that. But just the fact that we have created, that's a whole nother seminar. We've created culture, and we're going to tell our story. And we're going to get it out, and we're going to tell you what's happening in the communities that we live in. When you go back to early days of hip hop and rap, listen to the messages. It's the drugs that are in our community. It's the violence that we see every day. It's the fact that I can't find a job. It's the fact that everything around me is closing down. We're telling our story, but the question is anybody listening? Does anybody hear what it is that we're saying? Because our experience is valuable. And then our masculinity, sex, right? So kind of like that conqueror, never mind. I was about to get in trouble and say something real crazy. But just how sex, in terms of building up even our self-esteem and our self-worth and who we are. So we're always looking for that. And I would say that probably across cultures, we see this. So it's not just specific to African Americans. We deal with the same thing because guess what? We are all connected in some way. Amen? Amen. All right. So Reverend Cecil Murray says this, and I love this quote, that the days of coming to church for personal salvation alone are over. Today, we seek not only personal salvation, but social salvation as well. If we don't change the community, then I love this, the community will corrupt the individual. Wow. The community will corrupt the individual. So church, it can no longer just be like church as usual and we just go for a good message. Why? Because our communities are becoming a valley of dry bones. Now, for all my church people, you got that. For those who don't, I'll explain. Don't worry. So there's a prophet, and he sees a valley, and it's nothing but dry bones, and then he, has a conversation with God, and eventually what happens is God breathes breath into these dry bones, and what stands up is an army. So what that says to me as I step back and look at it is that what this really means is these are people. This isn't like something imaginary. These are people who have died somewhere along the way. Maybe they didn't fulfill their journey. And so we're looking at a community, especially within the African American community, of dry bones. People who are not reaching their potential. They're dying before their time. If you've ever dealt with SPA 6, SPA 8, whatever, wherever there's predominantly black folk, you understand this. This is businesses closing. This is opportunities leaving and going into other neighborhoods. This is lack of access. So this is what it is that we live in. But what was interesting was that God breathed his spirit into these bones. And that's what we need is the spirituality, is the spiritual community has to be breathed and infused into our community to bring life. Why is Christianity one of the things that's important? Real quick church history. Throughout the Bible, it is a misnomer to say that black folk only got Christianity when they brought us over here as slaves. That's totally inaccurate. If you look all up and through the Bible, it's black folk. From the beginning to the end, black folk. Moses, dude who parted the Red Sea, married him a black woman. It's in there. I didn't make that up. The table of nations is nothing but African nations. They only talk about like the one black dude in the Bible who helped Jesus carry the cross. Like that's the only thing that a black person was capable of doing. And there is so much more in there, right? And God is so diverse in his creation. So it's not just like they gave it to us like when we came over here. And I think going back to just generational trauma, just the miseducation that we get. They act like black folks started at slavery. That is miseducation. That's false. We're kings, queens, like most of the stuff that you see built, guess who built it? Okay, then guess who was running it? Okay, so you guys with me? Kinda? Okay, whatever, I'll say amen and keep pushing. All right, here's why this is important. There are elements to our practice, to our faith, that bring about healing, that bring about restoration and change. Prayer. I learned to pray from my grandmother. And I heard that, I think, just about from everybody that was on that Wisdom Keeper panel, that there was some woman, usually some older woman, who taught them how to pray, who was there with them. So I remember my grandmother teaching me the creepiest prayer you could ever teach a 4-year-old, which was, now lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Try praying that before you go to bed. It's a little creepy. But my grandmother taught me that prayer. And that's where I started in terms of praying and knowing that there is a connection that I have with God that I don't need anybody else to pray to and for me. I can do it myself. So think about the level of empowerment that brings, that I am connected and in fellowship and relationship with a all-powerful supreme deity who knows me and wants to be known. Right? Worship is sacred, and we saw some elements of just sacred worship and what that does to connect and reconnect. Faith, right? Faith is tied to hope. You tell me what is more evidence-based than hope. I'll go like psychological for all my group people, because I see my old group supervisor here, right? Hey, all right, so if you've ever read Yalom, right, he talks about the installation of hope. Right? And this is what we bring. So sacred scripture, meditation, getting quiet, hearing from God, stilling yourself and getting that answer from God. And so then we take that and we package that. And these are more or less kind of the packages that it comes in. So grief and loss groups, parentings, mentoring, sobriety, recovery, addiction. And this is the language that we speak. How many of you have ever prayed the serenity prayer? If you work in mental health, you ought to pray like every day. All right. So let's kind of talk about bridging the gap. And how do we bridge the gap? And I think what is very important is that we learn to understand that those who, within the African American community, who subscribe to Christianity speak a language, right? How many of you have ever worked with a client or a family and they went to church or they identified as being a Christian? Okay, so let's do this. I would imagine that you probably heard some terms, or they said some terms, and you're like, what? That ain't in no DSM. Where you find that one at? What are some of those terms? Now we can be like a little bit more like interactive, and you probably want to write because they can't interpret Swahili and Egyptian, because that's what my writing looks like. What are some of those terms that maybe you've heard? They're like, oh, okay. But it's coming from their tradition in terms of being a Christian or going to church. What have you heard? Just shout them out. Cast your cares. Yes, cast your cares upon the Lord, for he understands. Okay, cast your cares. That's one. What else? Delivered. Right, I've been delivered. I've been, set free. All right, so we got cast your cares, delivered. Give me more.
I'm not my brother's keeper.
Anointed. Huh?
I'm not my brother's keeper.
I'm not my brother's keeper. Yeah, and we know how that story ends. In case you don't, Cain killed his brother. So yeah, it's just all bad. All right, then I heard anointed, right? And even Jesus says, like, the Spirit of the Lord God has upon me. He has anointed me, like, to go out and do these great and powerful works. So anointed, right? When you hear these words, do they make sense to you in the context that they're being used? Right? Because this is important to understand the language. So when somebody says that they are casting their cares, what are they telling you? They're turning it over. Okay, what else?
They're trusting God to take care of what they can't take care of.
They're trusting God to take care of what they can't take care of. And I might add a little bit to that, and the stuff that you as this so-called expert can't take care of either. Right? Because there's something that I'm dealing with that is many years of school as you have and as many letters as you have behind your name. There's just some stuff you just can't take care of for me. So I need to rely on somebody else who I know got some answers and who can help me in this situation, right? So that's how we interpret it.
And so with that, if someone came into your office and they said that to you as the clinician, how do you respond to that?
Shock.
Or is it necessary to respond at all?
I'm not the clinician.
That's okay.
But I've shocked them. But if I give them the true scripture, spirituality, coming from a perspective of God, being spirit-filled, they're shocked.
Right.
They quit.
And that's part of what we're talking about, because in DMH we have, if you look at the assessments, and it's so funny that it seems like they're treating the whole spirituality aspect as something that's new and cutting edge that they just discovered is out there and is used as a coping mechanism. But their own assessments have that in there. But as clinicians, we're taught that we don't bring up certain things when we're talking with our clients. Like politics and religion are things that you stay away from. So that part of the assessment, a lot of clinicians will gloss over that. For me, that's the best part of the assessment for me. Because once I'm sitting with someone and they identify that they have a religious affiliation or they have a spiritual upbringing, and that is something that they use as a coping mechanism, that takes my assessment to a whole different place. Now my assessment is built around what they say they have used or what has worked for them in the past. So if they're telling me that prayer has worked for me, or when I go to Bible study on Wednesdays, or when I can just call somebody and they can pray with me, now I have to retrain myself, because now I have to put myself in that position if I'm going to be effective to them as a clinician. So now I might not be able to use what Freud said. I might not be able to sit and utilize the behavioral cognitive therapies that Ellis talks about. I might not be able to look at Mnuchin in a structural way with this person, except for the fact that now I have to join with them and make them feel as if the person they're sitting across from knows where I'm coming from, and that they can identify with my story. A lot of times when people walk into therapy, specifically African Americans, sometimes they're not looking for you to give them an answer, but they want you to hear what they're saying. They want you to be able to open your minds, not have that tunnel vision, and realize that this technique over here that they're giving me is not working. I'm telling you, these are the things that have worked for me. Now, can you help me build on those things? So that's where we're kind of coming from with the language of the church. So Pastor Parks is going to expound on that a little bit, and then we're going to take a look at a couple of vignettes and see if we can kind of utilize some of this language in the church.
So we're actually going to have to use like the vignettes now. So in one of your handouts, you'll have two-sided. So we're going to work this because I'm getting ready to close, which means I have like 4 more times. That was my first one. All right. So we see things like bound, oppressed, and these they come with a certain meaning. And in your vignette, you have one of a young man, Timothy, who's 17. And the names have been changed to protect the innocent, because this is a real life situation, right? So he's not as connected to the church, so you can just kind of look over, because I'm not actually going to read all of it. But he's, connected in the church from the standpoint that his mom goes to church. He shows up every now and again, but his mom is the one who's mainly involved. So we see that there's some academic underperformance. So all these things are probably going off as you're going through this as a clinician. So you probably have all sorts of red flags. He's ditching school, so sometimes he's truant, sometimes he's not going to class. There's marijuana use, and he's using it at least twice a week, and more if he can get his hand on some money to buy it from his friends. There's poor communication and conflict between him and his mom, right? So, and now what you're probably doing as a clinician, as a case manager, is in your head, you're formulating a diagnosis. You have already formulated a treatment plan. You know how many weeks it's going to take. Which program can I get him in? Oh, I think I can get him into such and such. Maybe this brother needs FSP if he really starts tripping. So what can I do to get him into? Part of the problem with that is that we never take the time to slow down. Now, I understand that we have constraints if you're at the agency level because they want the assessment by a certain time. I get that, been there. But if we slow down and put the brakes on, we'll see that there's a lot and a richness to the person that is sitting across from us. And there's a richness that even his mom brings when she describes certain things, right? So towards the end when she talks about feeling burdened, I'm burdened by something. And you actually we've given you a translation guide in terms of some of these words, which is by no means exhaustive, right? But something like burden. So a sense of overwhelming stress. Oh, and it's maybe prolonged stress. Now, as a clinician, that probably makes a lot more sense than if you told me you're burdened. Burdened how? But if I tell you I have ongoing chronic stress, that sent a whole nother message, and your brain then started doing something else as a clinician. How many of you are with me? Yeah? Okay. Then she talks about he may need deliverance, right? Well, what is deliverance? Well, it's being powerfully set free from oppressive forces and self-destructive behaviors. Do we see any self-destructive behaviors in this? We see all kinds of them. But what does that mean maybe as a clinician, right? So there's a process of recovery that she's saying needs to take place. There's liberation from addiction that she's hoping to see her child involved in. So when you're sitting across from someone who subscribes to this particular faith tradition, when they use these words or they bring these things up during a session, they're not attempting to convert you. That ain't their goal. This is how I would frame it, and I hope you would frame it in your heads. Think about when you go to a family's house and they offer you food. And this is always kind of a sticky one for clinicians. Do you accept the food? Do you reject it? If you kind of dismiss it because maybe you've seen some questionable stuff within the house, how do you, in a empathetic and genuine way, say, how do you, right? So we've been there. It's the same thing with the language. She's not attempting to convert you. She's looking to connect with you. She's looking to offer you a piece of herself that is real, a piece of herself that means something, that has importance and value, and she's offering you a piece of that for you to come into her world, which is empathy, which is you step outside of you step into my world, and you look around and you see what the walls look like in my world. And that's what she's attempting to do. Let me ask this question, and then we will close. I got 3 more after that. Which is, in terms of treatment, and take a look at this other sheet that we have for you, which gives you some different styles of treatment. So there's clinical therapy, there's pastoral therapy, there's counseling, there's coaching. We have mentoring, psychosocial help, or psychosocial support, social support, self-help. With what you know from this scenario, these bits and pieces, which one of these works? Which one of these would you, as a clinician, as a case manager, maybe say, hey, let's think about this. Okay, so you told me you're burdened. Okay, I know he's using drugs. What would you do now knowing this? Which of these would you use or direct them to? There's no wrong answer.
I would first find out what they have done already, because I don't want to direct you to a place where you've gone through services and the family feel like it was helpful for them.
Yeah.
So I have to see what they've already done.
Where have you already gone? What have you tried? Right? Because what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing, the same way, and expecting a different result. So you ran your head into that wall 5 times already. I'm not going to send you back to the same parenting group. because it didn't work the first 4 times. So what have you done? What has worked and what hasn't worked? Yeah. What else? How would you direct them? Which of these would you say, hey, let's try this? Or did you think about this? Oh, do I have to come down and start walking?
You know how that church works.
Right.
For the mother, she might be referred back to the church that she has that foundation and that's what she's speaking.
Okay.
And she's using this terminology she's heard
Mhm.
and it speaks about he needs deliverance. So maybe for her, back to her pastor.
Yeah.
And then give her more clothing to undergo with her Sunday school.
Yeah. So, and if you didn't hear that, so maybe we refer mom back to the church for pastoral counseling, because that's where she's connected to. Thought I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, I was just going to say for the son, looking over some of the descriptions of the coaching and his vignette that there's no father figure present with him, that needs coaching and somebody to help him find some of his internal strengths and resources.
Yeah.
And mirror for him what that looks like to be a responsible man in that situation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it sparked another thought, which is this. If you go back and you look at that particular vignette, there is someone who's in the picture who can maybe help fill some of that, not completely. Anybody know who it is if you picked up on that in the vignette? It's the pastor. So watch this. He may not identify as Christian. I don't really believe in this whole Jesus thing, like the guy on the cross, that sounds good, but I ain't with that. Mom, you can do whatever. But he's connected to the pastor. So the pastor, in a sense, is also an agent of change, even if he doesn't subscribe to that particular tradition, right? So now we have another support that we can bring in because, one, he's already connected to it. It's available because they've had some interaction, right? And he's even connected him to other things. So instead of bringing artificial stuff, and we live in a society where we use a lot of artificial stuff that ain't healthy for nobody. Instead of trying to bring in a bunch of artificial stuff into this family, let's just use what is already there, which is we have a pastor that he is already connected to who can fulfill some of the coaching, some of the mentoring.
Or even the person in the music industry that he connects to with it.
Yes.
You know, I mean, the big says that God will put the right person, you know, right. The teacher will appear when the student is ready, so maybe a connection of a connection that brings him
Right.
to a different.
Exactly. And we didn't have to go, like, submit a proposal for it, just send them to the church. There we go. Yes.
I was also going to recommend maybe a self-help group for mom, because it sounds like she's a single mom. There's no interaction with the biological father, and sometimes when you're going through struggles, you feel alone.
Yes.
And when you get around others who are going through some of the situations that you're going through, that removes that aloneness, and you will find out that somebody's going through just what you're going through, and they may be able to help and support you and be that call in the middle of the night when you don't have anybody else to talk to, and you want
Yeah.
to talk to somebody who's going through the same thing.
Isn't it amazing that sometimes we can suffer like alone, but we can actually be healed in community?
Well, if you have a young people's group and the group has structure, the young people at this age are looking for the rites of passage. If you don't have the male leadership or the influence to have that passage, someone has to substitute to give them the rites of passage and allow him the opportunity to grow from that. So that passage means you teach them to do that, and now say go forward and do. And then that reaffirms he has self-worth.
Yeah.
After you mentored him through that passage.
Yeah. That is so important, and I guess I will actually legitimately close on like this point, which is for real this time. What you said is so important, and I understand that like I can't speak for all of Christianity, I just can't. And I know there's been a lot of horrible stuff that's been done in the name of Christianity. I get that, so I can't deny it. But if we look at the core teaching, and if we take the spirit of it and not just the letter, because the letter can kill, but it's the spirit that actually gives life and breathes recovery and hope and wholeness. One of the things that Jesus said, who's a very smart guy, by the way, one of the things he said is that part of our duty is to connect and to love God, right? And love him with our whole heart, our whole mind, and everything. The next piece is just as important, which is that we have to love our neighbor as ourselves. Because the caveat to that is, how can you say that you love God whom you have not seen, and then you hate the person who's sitting right in front of you? And this is really the key of Christianity, which is the hope and the restoration for the soul. We heard about the spirit that a lot of times is broken, but a lot of times it's souls that are wounded within the African American community. Our will, our mind, our intellect, our emotions that are bruised and hurt, and we don't always know what to do with them. And when I say something a certain way, then I'm the angry black guy. But really, I wasn't the angry black guy. I was just telling you, I hate the fact that my mom has to work 5 jobs to take care of 3 kids, and I don't know where Pops is at. So I'm not doing it to scare you. I'm not doing it to be intimidating. I'm doing it because I have all these emotions, and some of the stuff that you're giving me to tell me how to express those emotions don't fit me. So give me something that fits me. And so that's really kind of I hope something that you take away from our presentation is, you don't have to ram it down their throat. And if they don't believe in it, we're not saying like force them to believe in it. Because if Timothy doesn't believe in Jesus and he's like, I don't want that, I'm more into like Islam, then dude, let's connect you to someone from that tradition. Let's bring them in. Let's talk to them. I ain't really into that. I'm, maybe into more indigenous practices. I'm coming to Dr. Noble and help lead him and guide him, because there's something that he's looking to connect to that you understand that I don't. And it doesn't invalidate me and it doesn't invalidate you. What it does is it supports him. Because at the end of the day, he is most important, not me. Amen? I felt that one. That was a good one. All right. So I think with that, I believe there are evaluations that they want you to fill out. Please take advantage of the handouts that we gave you. Again, the translation guide is not exhaustive, and you may find some different meanings to it. Write them in. There's also on the back of that one, I believe, some resources in SPA 6 and 8, I think, of agencies that are Christian churches that actually provide mental health and provide services. So please use it in your practice, and maybe even do some work on your on the vignettes as well, just to kind of sharpen some of those tools. Thank you, guys.